The notification came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was still awake sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, pressing a bag of frozen corn against my jaw. My phone was face up on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a chase alert, transaction declined, insufficient funds. My account had $4.12 in it. 3 weeks earlier, it had $6,800. I just sat there. The frozen corn was melting. I could feel the water soaking through the dish towel I'd wrapped around it, cold against my fingers. I didn't move. I just stared at that number $4.12 and tried to remember how to breathe. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, but the truth is, I don't know where the beginning is. With family, there's never a clean starting line. There's just a slow accumulation of moments you explained away or forgave or forgot, until one day you're sitting in the dark with a bruised face and an empty bank account, and you finally stop making excuses. So I'll start with the rehearsal dinner. That's where everything broke open. My cousin. I'll call her by what she was to me, not by name, because she doesn't deserve the real estate. Had been planning her wedding for 14 months. 14 months of group chats, venue tours, bridesmaid dress drama, seating chart arguments. I was a bridesmaid, of course I was. I'd said yes before she even finished asking because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in a restaurant downtown. The kind of place with cloth napkins and a prefixy menu, and a sommelier who pronounces things slowly so you know he studied abroad. My cousin had booked it 6 months in advance. My aunt and uncle were paying for most of the wedding, but they'd asked me to cover the rehearsal dinner deposit back in January, $1,200, because they were cash tight until February. I put it on my debit card without blinking. February came and went. I didn't bring it up. I told myself it would sort itself out. It didn't sort itself out. By the time the rehearsal dinner actually happened, I'd also covered the florist's balance when the check from my aunt bounced, another $340. And I'd driven my cousin to 3 different dress alterations appointments because her fiancé's car was in the shop, each one an hour each way from where I live. And I'd taken 2 days off work, unpaid, to help address invitations at my aunt's kitchen table while my cousin sat across from me watching reality TV and occasionally glancing over to confirm I was doing it right. I want to be clear, I didn't do any of this because anyone asked me to. I did it because it was just assumed that I would. That's a different thing, and it took me a long time to understand the difference. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I got there early to make sure everything was set up the way my cousin wanted. The table arrangements, the custom menus, the little favor bags she'd spent 3 weeks agonizing over. I was standing by the window adjusting a centerpiece when she walked in with her fiancé and a group of his family I'd never met. She looked at the room, looked at me, and said, "The centerpieces are crooked." "Not thank you." "Not this looks beautiful." Not even a hello. I said, "I just fixed them." She said, "Well, fix them again." Her fiancé's mother was standing right there. She looked at me with this expression, somewhere between sympathy and discomfort, and I felt my face go hot. I fixed the centerpieces. They were not crooked. Dinner was fine in the way that things can be technically fine and completely miserable at the same time. I sat at the far end of the table. I ate my salmon. I smiled when people looked at me. My aunt gave a toast and talked about what an amazing daughter she'd raised, and my cousin cried, and everyone applauded, and I thought about the $1,200 I'd never been paid back and decided this wasn't the moment. There was no moment. I kept waiting for one, and it kept not arriving. Afterward, we moved to the bar area for drinks. I was standing with a glass of sparkling water. I had a 40-minute drive home, and an early shift the next morning. When my cousin appeared at my elbow, I thought she was going to say thank you. I'd been bracing myself to accept it graciously. She said, "Did you tell Mom that I was rude to the caterer?" I blinked. "What?" "Mom just said something to me about how I need to be nicer to vendors." "Did you say something to her?" "I didn't say anything to anyone." "Because that's a really weird thing to bring up the night before my wedding." "I agree," I said. I didn't bring it up. She looked at me for a long moment. She had her champagne glass in her hand, and her hair was perfect, and her dress cost more than my monthly rent, and she looked at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. You've had a problem with me this whole time, she said. I can feel it. You've been weird and passive-aggressive for months. I haven't. My wedding is tomorrow, she said, and her voice dropped. Not quietly, pointedly. Can you please, for one day, not make everything about you? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat had closed. She walked back to her fiancé, slipped her arm through his, laughed at something someone said. 30 seconds. That's how long it took her to move on. I stood there for another minute. Then I set my water glass on the bar, got my coat, and walked out to the parking garage. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I just sat there thinking about all the things I should have said, and underneath that, this other quieter thought, something is wrong here. And it has been wrong for a long time, and I keep pretending it isn't. I went to the wedding. Of course I went. I put on the dusty rose bridesmaid dress and had my hair done and stood in the photographs and smiled until my face ached. My cousin was radiant. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception had a photo booth and a late-night taco bar and a DJ who played nothing but hits from 2008 to 2012, which, if I'm being honest, was genuinely fun. I drove home at midnight and went to bed and told myself, it's done. Let it go. She's married. She's happy. Things will be different now. I really believed that. 3 weeks later is when I got the chase notification. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how do you lose $1,600 without noticing? And the answer is that I didn't lose it all at once. It happened in pieces, over about 2 months, and each piece had an explanation that made just enough sense that I didn't look harder. Here's what I eventually pieced together. My cousin had my debit card number. She'd had it since January when I'd given it to her over the phone for the rehearsal dinner deposit. I'd never thought to monitor it closely because I trusted her. She was family. She used it 4 more times after that initial $1,200. There was a charge to a bridal styling service, $380, that I'd never authorized. There was a charge to a honeymoon travel agency, $1,950, that I initially assumed was somehow my mistake. Some subscription I'd forgotten about, and I let it sit in my transaction history for 3 weeks without disputing it. There was a charge to a home goods store, $840, right after the wedding when she and her husband were setting up their new apartment. And there was one more charge, $430, to a spa, 2 days before the rehearsal dinner. Total $4,800 in unauthorized charges on top of the $1,200 deposit I'd willingly paid and never been reimbursed for. $6,000. Gone. I sat with this information for 2 days before I did anything. I want to be honest about that. 2 full days of going to work and making my lunch, and feeding my cat and pretending my brain wasn't running this calculation on a loop in the background. Part of me kept trying to find an alternate explanation. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe these charges were somehow legitimate. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. But I wasn't misunderstanding anything. I knew what had happened. I just didn't want to know what it meant about the person I'd spent my whole life covering for. On the 3rd day, I called my bank. I told the fraud specialist on the phone that I had unauthorized charges on my account, and I listed them one by one with the dates and amounts. She was patient and thorough and asked exactly the right questions. At the end of the call, she told me the dispute process would take 7 to 10 business days and that they'd be issuing me a temporary provisional credit while they investigated. Then she said, "Do you know who may have had access to your card number?" I paused. "I have some idea," I said. She said that if I had information about who made the charges, I could also file a report with local police, and that the bank's fraud team might reach out to law enforcement if the evidence was clear enough. She said it matter-of-factly, like it was just procedural information, nothing personal. I said, "Okay, thank you." I hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then I opened my laptop and started pulling records. I'm a paralegal. I have been for 4 years. I know how paper trails work. I know what documentation looks like, what kinds of records are admissible, what constitutes evidence versus circumstantial information. I spent the next 3 hours organizing everything: screenshots of transactions, dates, the email thread from January where my cousin had asked for my card number, text messages where she'd referenced specific purchases that matched the unauthorized charges. The text messages were the ones that got me. She'd texted me a photo of her new living room setup. The rug, the throw pillows, the console table, saying, "Just finished the apartment, it's finally starting to feel like home." Ekmetz's charge was from the same store, same day, for $840. She'd sent me a photo of the things she bought with my money. She just hadn't realized I'd know. I called my mom that evening. She's the only person in my family I genuinely trust, and I needed to say the words out loud to someone before I did anything else. I told her everything. The card number from January, the charges, the text with the photo of the apartment. I didn't editorialize, I just laid it out. My mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Have you talked to your aunt?" "Not yet. You should give her a chance to make it right before you go to the bank or the police." I understood why she said that. My mom is a fixer. She believes in families sitting down at a table and working things out. She's not wrong that it sometimes works. But I also knew from watching this family my whole life that there were certain conversations my aunt simply could not have. Not without it becoming about her feelings, her stress, how hard things had been, how nobody appreciated everything she'd sacrificed. I said, "I'll think about it." I thought about it for approximately 4 hours. I called my aunt the next morning. I kept it simple. I told her I'd noticed some unauthorized charges on my account that corresponded to purchases I could trace, and that I needed to understand what had happened before I took next steps with my bank and potentially with the police. There was a very long silence. Then my aunt said, "I'm sure there's an explanation." I said, "I'm sure there is too. That's why I'm calling." Another silence. "Then I'll talk to her." I said, "I need to hear from you by tomorrow afternoon." After that, I'm moving forward with the dispute and the reports. I kept my voice calm and even. It took everything I had. My aunt said, "You don't need to threaten anyone." I said, "I'm not threatening. I'm telling you my timeline. There's a difference." She hung up. My cousin called me 40 minutes later. I almost didn't pick up. I stood there watching my phone vibrate on my kitchen counter, and I thought about all the ways this conversation could go. All the versions of it I'd already played out in my head. Then I picked up. She started crying immediately. Not the soft kind of crying, the loud, overwhelming kind, the kind that takes up all the space in a conversation before a single word gets spoken. I let it go on for about 30 seconds. Then I said, "I need you to listen to me." She said between breaths that she hadn't meant for it to go that far. That she'd planned to pay me back. That the wedding had cost so much more than expected, and she'd panicked and she'd told herself it was just borrowing, not stealing, because we were family. I said, "You didn't borrow, you didn't ask, you took." She said she knew that, and she was so sorry she'd been so stressed, she hadn't been thinking clearly. I said, "How much of what you just told me is true, and how much of it is what you think I need to hear?" Silence. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay back every dollar, $6,000, because we're including the deposit you were supposed to reimburse me for in January. You have 30 days. If I don't have the full amount in my account in 30 days, I'm filing a police report and I'm going to let the bank's fraud team do what they do. Do you understand?" She said quietly. "Are you serious right now?" I said. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." She didn't pay. Not in 30 days. Not in 60. My aunt called me twice during that period to tell me I was being unreasonable, that I was going to destroy the family over money, that if I had just been patient they would have figured something out. I want to tell you that I was unmoved. That's not entirely true. Both times I felt that particular sick feeling you get when someone you love frames your basic dignity as a character flaw. Like expecting to be paid back for money that was stolen from you is the same thing as being petty. Like protecting yourself is the same as attacking someone else. But I'd been through 2 months of documentation and 2 months of waiting, and I was done. On day 63, I filed the police report. The officer I spoke with was thorough. He looked at everything I'd brought, the bank records, the email with the card number, the texts, the transaction matching. And he didn't say much, just took notes and asked clarifying questions. Before I left, he told me that what I'd described could constitute felony theft by deception under state law, depending on what the investigation turned up. Felony theft by deception. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building and stared at the concrete wall in front of me. I had not wanted it to be a felony. I had wanted her to just pay me back. I had wanted someone in my family to look at what happened and say, this was wrong and we're going to fix it. That's all I'd ever wanted. But I was out of runway. The bank's fraud investigation had already concluded by then. I got my $4,800 back in provisional credit, and when the investigation closed, it became permanent. The bank flagged the account activity and had, apparently, already been in contact with law enforcement before I even filed the report myself. My cousin was contacted by a detective 6 weeks after I filed. I found out because my aunt called me, not crying this time, furious. She said I had gone too far, that I had blindsided them, that a detective showing up at my cousin's door was humiliating and unnecessary, and I could have handled this privately like an adult. I let her finish. Then I said, she stole $6,000 from me and neither of you were going to do anything about it. I did handle it like an adult. Adults have options when they're robbed. My aunt said, you were not robbed. She's family. I said, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. She hung up again. Here's what I know happened after, pieced together from what my mom told me and what eventually became part of a public record. My cousin was formally charged. The charge was reduced from felony to misdemeanor theft, which happens sometimes, especially when it's a first offense and the accused has no prior record. She was ordered to pay full restitution, complete a financial counseling program, and serve 18 months of probation. She and her husband moved to a different city 4 months later. I don't know if that was connected or just coincidence. I don't spend a lot of time wondering. My aunt and I haven't spoken since that last phone call. My mom talks to her occasionally and she tells me my aunt is still angry, still tells people I overreacted, still frames the whole thing as me choosing a bank account over family. I think about that sometimes. The way she says it, a bank account, like money, is a petty thing to care about. Like $6,000 is an amount of money that someone who lives alone on a paralegal salary should just absorb without comment. Like the issue was ever really about the money and not about the fact that my cousin looked at me, someone who had shown up for her in every way I knew how and decided I was a resource to be used. That's the thing they never say out loud. They never say you were wrong to expect to be treated like a person. They just make you feel, slowly and persistently, like expecting that makes you the problem. I want to tell you that I've healed completely and I feel nothing but peace. That's not true either. I still have a version of that night, the rehearsal dinner. Her voice dropping, can you please not make everything about you? That plays in my head sometimes when I'm driving or trying to fall asleep. I still have moments where I reach for my phone to text her something, some stupid meme or a photo of my cat, and then I remember. Grief is grief, even when what you're grieving had something rotten in it. But here's what I also have. I have $6,000 back in my account. I have a morning routine that doesn't include dreading my notifications. I have weekends where nobody needs me to drive them somewhere or cover something or show up and smile and make things easier for people who will not do the same for me. My best friend, who sat with me through most of this, who heard every version of every phone call and talked me through every moment I second-guessed myself, said something to me recently that I keep turning over. She said, you didn't end the relationship. You just stopped being the only one who was in it. I think that's right. I spent a long time believing that loving someone meant absorbing whatever they gave you, uncomplaining, indefinitely. That family was a blank check you signed and hoped for the best. I don't believe that anymore. Love has to be mutual to be real. Care has to go both directions or it's just extraction wearing a familiar face. My cat is asleep on the couch next to me right now. My apartment is quiet. I have leftovers in the fridge from a recipe I tried on Sunday, a real recipe, with instructions and everything, not just something I threw together in 10 minutes before collapsing. I'm doing okay. I'm actually genuinely doing okay. And if you're in something that looks like what I was in, if you're the one who always shows up, always covers, always absorbs, always explains away, I want you to know that you're allowed to put it down. You're allowed to say, I have documentation, and I have a timeline, and I have options. You're allowed to stop being the only one holding the rope. You don't have to wait until you're sitting in the dark with a frozen bag of corn and $4.12 in your account. You can just decide, whenever you're ready, that you're done. I've thought a lot about what made me finally move, not what pushed me to my limit. I'd been at my limit for months. What made me actually pick up the phone and dial? I think it was the photo. Jenna texted me a picture of her new living room, the rug, the throw pillows, the console table she'd arranged just so. And she was proud of it. Genuinely, completely proud. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew exactly how she'd paid for it, and she sent me the photo anyway. That's not someone who panicked and made a mistake and feels terrible. That's someone who decided on some level that what was mine was available to her. That I was available to her. That I would absorb it, the way I'd absorbed everything else. And life would go on. She wasn't wrong about my history. She was wrong about where it ended. I used to think that being a good person meant being endlessly patient. That if you loved someone, you made space for their worst behavior and you waited, quietly, for them to grow into something better. I did that for years with Jenna, with my aunt. With this whole family dynamic that always seemed to need one person willing to hold the rope without being asked and without being thanked. I was that person so consistently that I stopped noticing I'd volunteered for it. What I've learned, the hard way, the only way some things get learned, is that patience without limits isn't a virtue. It's an invitation, when you signal, through years of quiet accommodation, that there are no real consequences to taking from you. You shouldn't be surprised when someone takes. That's not me excusing what Jenna did. What she did was wrong. It was theft, and a court agreed, and she's living with the result of that. But I also had a role in building the conditions that made her think she could. Not because I was weak, because I was too focused on keeping the peace to notice the peace had already been broken a long time ago. The 3 things that actually got me through this, that I come back to whenever things feel uncertain, are simpler than I expected. Being honest with myself, even when the honest answer is uncomfortable. Being willing to act on what I know, not just sit with it. And trusting that doing the right thing, quietly and without drama, is its own kind of strength. No explosion, no confrontation in a parking lot, no moment of public triumph. Just documentation. A phone call. A report filed calmly at a desk with a cup of bad coffee and a detective who wrote everything down. My aunt still thinks I overreacted. She probably always will. But here's what I know. I have my money back. I have my boundaries back. I have a version of myself back that doesn't pre-apologize for existing or shrink down to make someone else more comfortable. Jenna made her choices, my aunt made hers, and I made mine. The math works out exactly the way it should.